Welcome back. Florida has a death penalty, but is it in name only? Last year, only one inmate was put to death. During 2016, several versions of the sentencing law were ruled unconstitutional by both the state and U.S. Supreme Courts. Last month, Governor Rick Scott signed a new law requiring a jury to unanimously vote for the death penalty to be used. Florida Supreme Court also ruled everyone sentenced to death after 2002 should be given new sentencing hearings. That includes Joseph Smith, convicted in the 2004 murder of 11-year-old Carly Bruscia here in Sarasota. And joining us to discuss the state of the death penalty here in Florida is Ed Brodsky, the state's attorney in the 12th Judicial Circuit, and Reverend Russell Meyer, executive director of the Florida Council of Churches. And gentlemen, I thank you for joining us because this is such a difficult, hard issue, no matter what side of it that you're on. And Ed, let me start with you and get you to react to the attorney representing Mr. Smith, who said that Joseph Smith's death sentence will be reversed and his case will be remanded back to Sarasota. In your opinion, is that a given?
Well, I think that's a potential possibility. I think right now we're still awaiting a ruling from the Circuit Court here, Judge Andrew Allens. And right now we've made legal arguments. The Attorney General's office has represented us in those arguments. We're certainly advocating against it. So we think that there's a possibility that it could go either way, and we're certainly hopeful that there is not a need for another penalty phase.
The main thrust of that argument, is it the fact that the jury should not have been unanimous or did not need to be unanimous, or was it the fact that how do you go back to so long in time and reverse a jury decision?
Well, going back to the United States Supreme Court opinion in Hurst, they essentially said that if it was a harmless error and a rational jury, having applied the current legal standards today, would have still found unanimously in favor of the death penalty, then there's an argument. And in this case, we have to remember that the jurors not only convicted Joseph Smith of committing a homicide, the murder of Carly Bruscia, but they also found beyond a reasonable doubt, unanimously during the guilt phase of the trial, that he was guilty of kidnapping and guilty of sexual battery. Both of those are, and the fact that she is under 12, those are all aggravators under Florida law for the death penalty.
But it was not unanimous in terms of the death penalty, and therefore under the current law, he would get life.
Right. But because the jury made the finding unanimously during the guilt phase that he was guilty of those felony offenses, those are aggravators which constitute factors that for a recommendation for the death penalty. So that was the basis of the argument that was presented.
Reverend Meyer, you listened to the facts of that case as was reported by Kate, and this was so incredibly traumatic for this community, this state, and across the country. How do you not come to the conclusion that this man should be dead?
Every murder is egregious and harmful and hurtful. I had an uncle who was stabbed to death in Nebraska when I was a young man. So the argument that this is really bad and therefore we need to kill the bad guy, that argument is emotional, it's not rational. And so the question is, should we have a justice system based upon reason or based upon emotion? What we will spend to re-sentence and retrial the almost 400 people on death row now, and there are some arguing that almost all of them will have to be retried, is $1 million to $1.5 million per trial. So we're looking at right now spending almost $500 million to come back to that sentence when we know we can protect society completely with life in prison without parole and be done with it. And the families can say, there's the closure, they're going to die in prison, it's said and done.
We have less than a minute in this segment, but is the thrust of your argument today the death penalty itself, or the fact that the Supreme Court of both the state and the country now requires it to be unanimous?
It's both. We have a comprehensive perspective. I mean, we begin with thou shalt not kill. We don't need a death penalty to protect society. We have sufficient prisons to keep society protected.
Okay, we are just getting started. We'll pick up our conversation right after we check the weather, so stay with us. Welcome back. If you're just joining us, we are discussing the requirement for sentencing someone to death in Florida. Under the new law signed last month, juries must now unanimously agree to capital punishment. What does this mean for the men and women on death row in Florida? Our guest tonight, our state's attorney, Ed Brodsky of the 12th Judicial Circuit, and Reverend Russell Meyer of the Florida Council of Churches. And Reverend, let me start with you again, because before the break, you made your case about why we shouldn't have the death penalty, but you know likely that this governor and this legislature is not going to do anything to end it in Florida.
That may be, but he won't always be governor. I think he's got a year and a half left, roughly speaking. Look, the only places that use the death penalty now are authoritarian regimes in the Bible Belt in the United States. 31 states have stopped using it, 31 jurisdictions. The U.S. military hasn't executed anybody in 20 or 30 years. So it's on its way out. We don't need it, and it's very expensive. We spend a lot of money on it that takes away from public safety. And so there's a corrosive effect that the death penalty has throughout the whole criminal justice system because of the way it diverts resources and attention from the kinds of investments in society that could actually prevent murder.
On a practical basis, with the Supreme Court rulings and what you now must do in terms of these death penalty cases, is the larger debate almost becoming moot because the difficulty of convicting somebody and getting them sentenced to death is becoming so onerous that it will become less and less, fewer and fewer cases that are going to head that direction?
Well, clearly, I think what we've seen over the last year, 2 years is as the Reverend speaks about, we're seeing nationally, and I think we're seeing here in the state of Florida, that criminal justice is being carefully looked at, and I think that criminal justice reform is coming to Florida. And I think I've spoken to a number of groups in our Bay Area, in our community, about reform in the criminal justice system. And certainly I think we've seen that now make its way to the death penalty and the process that's been implemented now with the unanimous jury vote. And sure, it's going to make it harder. I think it's going to make it more difficult. But I think that the utilization and the identification of those offenders that we seek the death penalty on, and for those of us that are handling these types of cases, prosecutors throughout the state of Florida, we are identifying those that we think deserve the ultimate penalty. And so we understand that there's a cost, but we understand that there are going to be individuals that commit such an atrocious crime in our community that the ultimate penalty is what we think they deserve.
Now, I don't know if you could get into your personal view of the death penalty, but I do know that many prosecutors and many governors, or even the president at one point, or President Obama, would say, I'm personally against the death penalty, but it's my responsibility to uphold the laws as they are written. I mean, do you have a personal view that you can share?
Sure. And
how it affects your judgments?
Well, recently we saw here in Orlando with the state attorney there, Ramos Ayala, coming forward to say that she wasn't going to seek the death penalty in the Ninth Circuit there in Orlando. I can tell you that there are 20 elected state attorneys throughout the state of Florida, and that we as an association came together and came forward to say that all 19, the rest of us, would...
No, that's not true.
In Florida.
Well, Andrew Warren backed away from the statement condemning her decision.
No, but I understand. But what he did is all 19 state attorneys, including Andrew Warren over in the 13th over in Tampa, still said that in appropriate cases they will seek the death penalty. Andrew Warren has said that. So yes, as an office, we will seek the death penalty. We are currently involved in cases where we are seeking the death penalty. We will continue to seek the death penalty in murder cases here in the circuit.
Does that issue go more to whether or not it was proper for the governor to take death penalty cases away from that prosecutor, rather than the state's attorneys in Florida taking a position on whether or not they will pursue the death penalty?
Well, I think that we wanted to make it known that the other elected state attorneys across the state of Florida, we wanted our constituents to know and our citizens to know that Ramos Ayala stood alone in her position.
Well, wait, there are over 100 national
I'm speaking about Florida.
Right, but so let's be very clear that within Florida, now when you see a governor who has exercised a very vague portion of his own authority to sort of quash what is happening in one office. You don't want that to happen in your office. Most state attorneys' offices are already desperately underfunded. They haven't been fully funded by the legislature for several years. And so you wouldn't want to see that happen to you. So there is a suppression of the independent judiciary happening right now under this governor. That's of grave concern, not only to people in Florida, but to people outside of Florida. So the governor's action is very, very disconcerting on a number of issues. And the state's attorney in Orlando had a very reasonable and rational argument for the position she took. She wasn't caving in to political and emotional pressure. She made a very rational case.
Considering how people feel and how split people are about the death penalty, I would imagine it is going to be a very tough chore to get any jury to unanimously vote for the death penalty. If it was tough before, it's certainly not getting easier now.
Well, what we're hearing is that when a jury understands that they must return a verdict unanimously, for example, in Joseph Smith, had the jury been instructed, and we believe that had the jury been instructed that the law at the time was that they had to unanimously find in favor of the death penalty, we believe that the jury would have recommended unanimously for the death penalty.
I want to ask tough questions individually to both of you. First, Ed, respond to what Reverend Meyer said in terms of considering the cost of litigating death penalty cases, that it makes more sense for the state just to lock these people up and throw away the key rather than to pursue something that takes years, if ever, to accomplish.
And listen, he's right. It is expensive. It is an expensive process. But inmates that are sentenced to prison for life, they litigate very extensively. I can tell you that I have a number of lawyers throughout the state and in my office that are extensively litigating post-conviction motions, such as the motion that Joseph Smith has brought forward. He has gone through his direct appeals and he has lost. He is now on a collateral attack post-conviction motion, which is a very routine thing for inmates that are sitting incarcerated will do over and over and over again, file legal challenges. So whether they're on death row or whether they're in prison alive and breathing, they're going to be filing legal challenges. It is an expensive process, but there is a deterrent value, respectfully, with which I know he disagrees with, but we believe that there is a deterrent value and that there is a message that needs to be made that if you commit a serious, capital felony, that you could one day face lethal injection.
So that's a belief. Let's be very clear. I'm talking about reasons. I have beliefs. My beliefs are in God. God says, do not kill. So let's not put beliefs into what should be a rational process.
We have less than a minute here, but I do want to get this question to you. Some of these crimes, like the Bruscia case, are so horrible that a lot of the people who are watching this tonight are saying that man deserves to die, and he deserves to die in the way that the state commands.
God does not ask for the death of any person. God does not ask for the death of any person. And so the argument we're making here is we get to ask for that. And I'm just saying, as a person of faith, no.
Okay. Let's take a quick break, and when we return, we'll have final thoughts from our guests, plus what some of our viewers are saying about last night's topic, a bill to reveal dark money donors in Florida. Stay with us. Welcome back. There are 371 people on death row in Florida. If any of them were put there without a unanimous vote from a jury, should they be able to appeal their sentence? Should someone like Joseph Smith, who kidnapped, raped, and killed 11-year-old Carly Bruscia, have that chance? Our guests join us right now for final thoughts, and the question goes to you, Reverend Meyer.
So you can pick out a clear case and say, oh, surely that one. But in the state of Florida, we've picked out a lot of cases that we know surely not. That was completely wrong. 156 people have been exonerated since 1970, 26 in this state. This state has never convicted under capital punishment a white man of killing a black person. So the way that system gets used in the state of Florida is filled with injustice. Many of those who are convicted have mental illness issues that qualify as mitigators that throw out their death conviction. So under the current kind of system that we have now, we're going to continue to have constitutionality problems. The death penalty is irredeemably broken in this state. It's time to move on, save our money, and do justice right.
Ed, is this a matter of fixing those issues that the Reverend talked about, or what?
Well, I can tell you, let's talk about Joseph Smith. I mean, we're currently in the middle of litigation with that, and we're awaiting a verdict and a ruling from the judge on that. We're hopeful that the court rules in our favor so that a new penalty phase won't be necessary. But I would say that if there is a new penalty phase that's ordered, we will proceed, and so we want folks to know that we will go to a new penalty phase and seek the death penalty
But
again.
not all cases are that clear cut.
Right. And so where are we now? I mean, you know, one of the things I talked about earlier is that we're seeing criminal justice reform. I think that we're seeing systemically from law enforcement to the courts to probation to prosecutors that we're making significant efforts to do everything that we can in light of what the Reverend's talking about to rehabilitate, to treat, and to restore offenders. But as we talk about the death penalty, there is a distinction here to be made and an important deterrent value for those that commit serious crimes. We are going to seek the ultimate penalty.
There's no science that supports deterrence in the death penalty. No science at all.
We could go on and on about this, but we have to let it go there. Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you
Before
very
we
much.
go, we want to share with you what some of our viewers are saying about last night's topic, a bill to uncover dark money. Political action committees, or PACs, will transfer funds from donors from one PAC to another to essentially launder the money and leave the source untraceable. State Representative Joe Gruters is sponsoring legislation to block these transfers and reveal who is funding political campaigns. It's unlikely to pass this session, but Gruters is vowing to make it his signature legislation, and here's what some of you are saying. David Iannati writes, if the bill aims to do anything altruistic for the benefit of the people, it has no chance. Eric Swadek writes, I believe it, I'll believe it when I see it, great idea. And Dave Perry writes, time to start a letter-writing campaign to ensure this bill gets passed. Those that don't vote for it need to be kicked out next election. Let us know what you think about Florida's death penalty sentencing law. Join the conversation at our Facebook page at facebook.com/news@7. And FYI, you can watch past Roundtable discussions. They're available on Apple TV, Amazon Fire, and Roku. Thanks to both our guests for being here tonight. Ed Brodsky is the state's attorney for the 12th Judicial Circuit, and Reverend Russell Meyer is the executive director of the Florida Council of Churches.